returned to the linen tablecloth my mother embroidered when I was 12, because that's what you do when you still believe family matters. You light candles even when no one notices. You bake the ginger snaps your grandson used to love, though he hasn't mentioned them in years. You take out the extra folding chairs, just in case. You set the table for 4, even though your son only said, "We'll see." And when your phone stays silent all day before Thanksgiving, you still lay out the silverware, because you never stop hoping. Even when every sign tells you you're not part of the plan anymore. Norleen McTavish wiped her hands on her apron and stepped back to inspect the dining table. It looked lovely, quiet, but lovely. The tablecloth, though yellowed at the edges, had a certain kind of dignity, so did the plates, each with a faint gold rim and a crack that told a story. She'd used the good set today, the one that had belonged to her late mother-in-law. It felt right. It felt hopeful. She glanced at the wall clock. 3:52 p.m. Too early for dinner. Too late to still be waiting for the call. Still, she hovered by the phone a little longer. She didn't need much. Just a, "Hey, Mom, we might swing by later. Or can you save us a plate?" Something that would tell her she wasn't forgotten. But nothing came, just the quiet hum of the fridge and the smell of clove and cinnamon from the pies cooling near the window. She sighed and turned toward the kitchen, checking the turkey one last time. Perfectly golden. She had basted it every 30 minutes like clockwork. The mashed potatoes were smooth. The cranberry sauce homemade. She'd even made little place cards. Just for fun. Grant. Harley. Ben, though her teenage grandson had long outgrown that sort of thing, Norleen didn't mind. She didn't need them to be impressed. She just wanted to feed them, to sit and talk, to be part of something again. The last time they all had dinner at her place was nearly 2 years ago, on Grant's birthday, and even then, it had felt more like an obligation than a celebration. They had left by 7:30. Back then, she had told herself not to take it personally. They were busy. Everyone was busy. But this year, Thanksgiving was different. It was supposed to be at her house, at least. That's what they'd all said in September when she asked. "We'll figure it out." "Mom," Grant had muttered over speakerphone, "Harley's family wants to do something, but we'll let you know. Let you know." That phrase had lived rent-free in her mind for weeks. She had decided not to press. She didn't want to be a nag. She wanted to be the easy one, the flexible one, the one who just smiled and understood. So she started prepping anyway, just in case. Now, the case was closed. At 4:17 p.m., her phone buzzed with a text from Harley. "Happy Thanksgiving. Norleen. Hope you're having a restful day. House is packed here. Sending love." Norleen stared at the message for a full minute, as if rereading it might make it say something else. Restful day. House is packed. That was it. "No, we miss you. No, wish you were here." She felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Not anger, not even sadness. Just wait. A kind of hollow pressure that sat behind her ribs and refused to budge. She put the phone down without replying. Instead, she picked up the place cards and slowly slid them into a drawer. Then she poured herself a glass of sparkling cider, sat down at the end of the long, empty table, and began to eat. The turkey was tender. The mashed potatoes were just right. She had done a good job. Still, with every bite, something in her heart chipped a little more when her husband Fred was alive. Thanksgiving had been loud, messy, filled with mismatched chairs and cousins yelling over football games. Even when money was tight, even when the turkey was dry, there had been laughter. But Fred had been gone 10 years now, and each year, the silence had grown thicker. Now even Grant barely called unless something was needed, like babysitting, or that one time last year when he asked if she could help co-sign on a business line of credit. "Not a huge deal," he said. "Just a signature on some trust paperwork for liquidity. Said it would help with taxes." She hadn't asked too many questions. That's what mothers did, support without needing details. She wondered now if that had been a mistake. After dinner, she boxed up the leftovers, a small container of turkey for the freezer, in case Grant came by next week. She still believed maybe he'd stop by, maybe with the kids, maybe not. It was almost 7 when she began putting away the china. Her hands were slow, but methodical. As she opened the drawer to slide the place cards back in, something else caught her eye, an old manila folder tucked behind the table mats. She pulled it out. McTavish Family Trust, primary holder, Norleen McTavish. Her name, she flipped through the pages. There were signatures. Hers, Grant's. A bank representative, a decade old. One line in bold caught her eye. Trust is pledged as collateral against small business loan. 2021. She froze. Collateral. Grant had used her name, her trust, for a loan. Had he even told her? No, she would have remembered that. She kept reading. Amount secured. $130. $1,000. Loan due. 2026. A business expansion, it said. Probably the company Grant always vaguely mentioned at dinner. He hadn't said it was tied to her name, to her trust. She sat down at the kitchen table, folder still open in front of her. Suddenly, the silence in the house didn't just feel empty. It felt weaponized, like a life sentence given with a smile. She wasn't a mother to them anymore. She was a signature on a paper, a seat they didn't need, a name on a trust, a backup plan. Was this how every revenge story started? With someone quietly realizing they'd become invisible. She didn't want revenge. That wasn't her. But maybe she did want something else. A shift, a choice, a different ending than the one they had written for her. And she was about to write her own. Norleen didn't sleep much that night. The turkey leftovers were in the fridge, untouched. The cranberry sauce congealed in its crystal bowl, like something ceremonial no one had shown up for. Her knees ached, an old familiar ache from years on her feet as a nurse. But tonight, it wasn't just her joints that hurt. It was the kind of ache that crawled into the chest and spread like cold. At 2:13 a.m., she got up, put on her robe, and padded back into the kitchen. The folder was still there. She stared at the bold type like it was an accusation. Trust pledged as collateral. Not shared. Not jointly owned. Pledged. By her son? She poured herself a glass of water. And somewhere in the dark, the heating unit clicked on. It was the only sound. Her phone buzzed once on the counter. A message from Grant. Hope you had a nice day. Sorry we couldn't come. Things got a bit crazy here. Kids say hi. Norleen stood still, phone in hand. That was it. No thank you for the food, though he didn't know she'd cooked. No apology. No plan to visit. Just a casual brush off at 2A. Ma? Like she was a loose end he had to tie up before sleep. She put the phone face down, and in that moment, something inside her turned. Not broke, turned, like a weather vane in a shift of wind. The next morning, Norleen made tea and stood by the window watching the neighborhood. She used to walk this street with Grant when he was just a boy, collecting fall leaves for school projects, stopping to chat with the neighbors. Now she knew none of their names. The little yellow house across the street had sold to a young couple with 2 golden retrievers and a Subaru. They always waved, but never came closer. Everyone stayed in their lanes now. That's just how life moved. She sipped her tea and looked at the manila folder still on the counter. She picked it up again and reread the loan terms. $130,000, a small business loan tied directly to her trust. No signatures from her in recent years. The original agreement was from nearly a decade ago, before Fred passed. She remembered that day now. Grant had come by with documents. It's just formal, he said. Safer in your name anyway. I'll take care of it. She hadn't asked questions. She was proud. Her son, the financial whiz, starting a company. She'd wanted to be helpful. She had trusted him, but he had never trusted her enough to ask again. And now, here she was, cut out of Thanksgiving dinner because the house was too full. Full of clients, coworkers, Harley's family. Everyone except the woman who had once sold her grandmother's necklace to help pay Grant's college tuition. The realization hit her with such force. She had to grip the edge of the sink. He didn't forget her. He omitted her. On purpose. That kind of exclusion didn't happen accidentally. A few hours later, she called the bank. The voice on the line was bright and efficient. Mrs. McTavish. Yes, you are the listed trust holder. If you'd like to schedule an appointment to discuss disbursement options, we can set something up this week. Norleen stared at the calendar on her fridge. Friday, 10. That worked just fine. That night, she made herself a small dinner, no candles, no place settings, no extra chairs. And for the first time in years, she sat without checking her phone, but something surprising happened. A knock on the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. She opened it to find her neighbor, Martha, from 3 doors down, holding a pie. Sorry, Norleen, I know it's late. I had extra and thought of you. Norleen blinked. You okay? Martha asked, looking past her shoulder at the dimly lit house. Norleen nodded. Yeah, just quiet year. Us too, Martha said, offering a small smile. We ended up just the two of us. My daughter flew to Arizona, said it was easier. Easier, Norleen repeated softly, then smiled. You want to come in? They sat for a while, pie untouched, talking like women do when words have been held in too long. At one point, Martha said, sometimes I wonder if we're all just placeholders for when our kids need something. Like, when they don't, we vanish. Norleen looked down into her tea. I used to think that was just in my head. It's not, Martha said simply. They forget we used to have lives before them. There was silence. Then Norleen laughed. A short, surprised laugh. Didn't think tonight would turn into a group therapy session. Martha grinned. Better than spending it scrolling through photos of someone else's perfect dinner table. And here, viewer, let me gently ask you something. Have you ever been left out of your own family's life without anyone saying it aloud? Not with cruelty, but with distance. Not with screaming, but with silence. If you have, you're not alone. Norleen's story may feel like a revenge story on the surface, but really, it's about something quieter and deeper. It's about reclaiming worth without needing permission. When Martha left, Norleen put away the cups, folded the linen napkins, and sat back down at the kitchen table. She didn't feel angry. Not yet. What she felt was clarity. That folder, that signature she once gave away without reading, was the last piece of her she'd handed over without checking the cost. She wasn't going to rage. She wasn't going to call. She was going to act. The bank was quieter than she remembered. Years ago, she and Fred had opened their first joint account here. Back then, the tellers smiled with red lipstick and the pens were chained to little plastic islands. Now it was all touchscreen kiosks and hushed conversations behind glass. But Norleen had an appointment with a real person, and she was right on time. Miss McTavish. A young woman in a gray blazer called, standing at the doorway to a private office. Yes, Norleen answered, smoothing the front of her coat as she stood. Her heart thudded like she was doing something wrong. Even though she wasn't. Inside the office, everything was sleek. Chrome handles. A minimal desk, a soft citrus scent in the air. The woman, Stephanie, according to her nameplate, offered her a bottle of water and a carefully professional smile. So, you're the primary holder of the McTavish Family Trust. How can I help today? Norleen hesitated, then placed the manila folder gently on the desk between them. I want to talk about dispersing it, she said simply. All of it. Stephanie blinked. The full amount, yes. I want it transferred to my personal savings. And then I'd like the trust dissolved. Stephanie sat up straighter. I see. May I ask why? Norleen gave a polite smile. Because I've decided I'm done being convenient. It took nearly an hour to go over everything. There were disclosures, verification, identity checks. Stephanie asked if she wanted to notify the secondary party, her son, of the change. No, Norleen said calmly. He'll figure it out. The final balance was a $152,877.34. The number looked like a stranger to her. So much money tied to so many years of silence. So many moments of saying sure when she meant that's not fair. So many nights of waiting by a phone that didn't ring. As the final form printed from the laser printer, Norleen felt something in her shift. Not like a celebration. Not like victory. It felt like release. The next few days, she moved slowly. On purpose. She didn't want to make rash decisions. She made lists. What to keep. What to give away. What parts of her life could fit in a smaller, freer space. She visited a little real estate office downtown that still used handwritten for sale signs. The receptionist, a gray-haired woman with turquoise earrings, listened kindly when Norleen said she was looking for somewhere quiet. Any particular area in mind? She asked. Flathead Lake, Norleen answered without thinking. Somewhere near the water. Somewhere where the silence doesn't feel like abandonment. The woman nodded as if she understood exactly. Back home, Norleen went into the guest room, the one she used to keep ready for Grant and the kids. Back when they visited, the comforter hadn't been washed in over a year. The bookshelf was full of old photo albums, dusty and sun-faded. She pulled one out. The cover creaked as she opened it. There was Grant, 7 years old, grinning with a missing tooth. Fred holding the camera, laughing. Norleen herself, arms wrapped around her son, hair windblown, eyes bright. They'd been poor then, but they'd been close as the pages turned. Time blurred. Birthdays, Christmases, swim meets, high school prom, college move-in day. Then, somewhere in the middle pages, the gaps began. There were fewer photos, fewer smiles, more group shots where she was the one holding the camera. Not in the frame, events she remembered hearing about only after they happened. She hadn't noticed it then, how she was slowly being cropped out, page by page. She saw herself disappear from her own family story. She packed 3 boxes that day. One for what she would take, one for donation, one for things she hadn't decided on yet, mostly sentimental pieces that still carried warmth. That night, sitting in her recliner with a blanket over her lap, Norleen checked her email. There was a message from the bank. Your disbursement has been completed. Remaining balance, $0.01. She read it twice, her fingers cold on the mouse pad. That was it. The trust was gone. The company Grant had leveraged against it, she didn't know how dependent they were on that loan. She didn't want to know. Really, she wasn't trying to hurt him. She was just finally protecting herself. She closed the laptop and stared into the dim living room. The streetlights outside cast a familiar glow on the walls. But it no longer felt like her house. It felt like a waiting room. She thought about the Thanksgiving she'd hosted, the time she drove across town in a snowstorm to pick up Elliot from practice, the time she brought soup to Harley when she had the flu, the emergency babysitting, the birthday cakes, the advice no one wanted but always needed. It wasn't that she had given too much. She had given willingly. What broke her wasn't the giving. It was that none of it was remembered. Or worse, it was remembered as expected, as owed. The next day, she visited the local post office. The clerk, Mr. Hensley, had a mustache so thick it practically moved when he spoke. Got a little postcard from Montana, Norleen said, sliding it across the counter. Flathead Lake, he asked, glancing at the address. That's the one, she replied. He grinned. My wife's been saying we should retire there. Norleen smiled. You should. They say the sunsets are something else. As she walked out, she felt her steps lighter than they had in years. In her living room, she placed a note inside a drawer that Grant sometimes used when he visited. The note was short. She didn't need more than a few lines. Don't worry. I'm fine. Don't come looking out of guilt. The door will always be open to those who see me, not just what I can offer. She folded it gently and slid it into the drawer beside a photo of Fred, standing tall in his work boots, holding a rake and smiling at the camera like life hadn't yet figured out how to knock him down. Norleen looked at the picture for a moment longer, then nodded like they'd just made a silent agreement. She was leaving, not running, not hiding, just walking forward finally as herself. Norleen never liked goodbyes, so she didn't give any. On Monday morning, while the neighborhood was still half asleep, she boxed up the last few things, her wedding photo with Fred, the teapot she used every morning for 30 years, and the one blanket her grandson used to cuddle in when he was small enough to need her lap. She left the antique armoire. They'd have to call a moving company if they wanted it. She wasn't going to lift for people who had stopped seeing her. The house didn't feel like hers anymore. It hadn't in a while. She locked the front door slowly, not because she needed to, but because it felt respectful. as if she was closing a chapter, not slamming it, just placing a soft period at the end of a long, overwritten sentence. At the airport, she checked her bags with a calmness that surprised her. Headed somewhere special. The woman behind the counter asked politely. Montana, Norleen replied. Flathead Lake, the woman smiled. Beautiful place to disappear to. Norleen gave a small, knowing nod. That's the idea. She didn't explain. She didn't have to. The plane ride was quiet. She stared out the window as the clouds turned into snow-dusted hills. Montana opened up like a forgotten song, wide, crisp, and waiting. The air smelled like pine, and maybe a little like freedom. She had booked a small lakeside rental, nothing fancy, but clean, warm. And hers, the landlord, a Vietnam vet named Dennis, helped carry her bags inside. When he saw the framed photo of Fred, he tipped his head and said, "Good man." "The best?" she replied. That night, she sat out on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her leg, watching the water move like glass under moonlight. There were no sirens, no phones, no calendar reminders, just stillness. For the first time in decades, Norleen didn't feel like she had to ask anyone for anything. She didn't have to cook for people who forgot her name unless they needed a babysitter. She didn't have to smile through clipped conversations or pretend she wasn't hurt when plans were changed last minute, always at her expense. She wasn't bitter. That was the strange part. She didn't want Grant to suffer. She didn't want Harley to beg for forgiveness or the kids to show up crying at her door. She just wanted herself back. And slowly, quietly, she was getting there. Later that week, Norleen walked through the Saturday morning market in the town square. People sold honey, pottery, hand-sewn aprons. No one knew her. No one asked why she looked familiar or where she'd come from. And yet, they smiled. They made space for her in the coffee line. They complimented her scarf. One woman, Lorraine, ran a booth for elder wellness and invited her to a monthly meetup for women over 60. "We're not here to complain about our knees," she laughed. "We're here to make sure we're still being heard." Norleen raised an eyebrow. "And if no one listens," Lorraine shrugged, "then we listen to each other. That's more than most people get." It was exactly the kind of truth Norleen had forgotten existed. A few days later, she sat on the dock behind her rental. Watching the wind shift across the lake, she thought of her mother. How she used to say, "Sometimes you don't need a battle cry, just the courage to walk away." Norleen had spent most of her adult life waiting for someone to notice how much she gave. She never asked for thanks. She just hoped they'd see it. But they didn't. The moment she realized Grant had used her trust, without asking, without even checking, something inside her had broken. But the real turning point wasn't anger. It was clarity. She realized it wasn't just the trust fund he assumed he had access to. It was her time, her patience, her presence, her loyalty. All of it had become part of his operating budget, emotionally and financially. And when she no longer served the story he was telling, successful son, grateful mom, happy family, she was edited out. She thought about how many women she knew who had similar stories. Stories not written in lawsuits or screaming matches, but in leftover pies never eaten, in voicemails never returned, in hugs cut short because someone had a schedule. It made her wonder just how many mothers had been left out of their own lives. One morning, she walked to the community center where Lorraine's group met. It was simple, a circle of chairs, coffee in mismatched mugs, hands that reached for each other without needing backstory. They didn't ask what had brought her here. They asked what she wanted to build next. And Norleen, who hadn't made a want list in years, said softly, "I think I want to help women like me." Not loud, just steady, tired, but not done. The women nodded. One reached over and squeezed her hand. It was the first time in a long time she felt seen without having to explain herself. A week later, she opened a checking account in her name. No co-signers, no favors. She used part of the money from the trust to sign a lease on a small cottage near the lake. Sunlight in every window. A garden out back. The owner had lowered the rent after hearing her voice. "You sound like someone who's starting over," he said. "I am," she replied. with no shame in her voice, and she meant it. When she got home that evening, she made herself a roast chicken, the same recipe her mother taught her. She set one plate, one glass, one candle. No guests, just gratitude. Not for the past, not for the pain, but for the chance to finally stop being invisible, to live for herself. Out loud, even if no one was listening. She sliced the chicken carefully, took a bite, and smiled, not because it was perfect, but because she had chosen it. Her new life had no fanfare, but it didn't need any. It was hers. The first Monday of spring in Montana came gently. The lake, once cold and still, shimmered under soft sun. Norleen stood barefoot in the kitchen of her new cottage, holding a chipped mug of Earl Grey and watching a squirrel dart along the fence. She had begun keeping a journal again, something she hadn't done since Fred passed. Most mornings now started with quiet thoughts and warm tea, instead of texts left unanswered or casseroles for people who never came. She no longer waited for her son to call. Not because she didn't care, but because she had finally accepted that care had to be mutual, or it wasn't care at all. Each day settled into a rhythm. On Tuesdays, she helped at the local thrift store, folding clothes and chatting with people who remembered her name after one meeting. On Thursdays, she walked by the water with Lorraine and a few others from the women's group. They talked about books, sore knees, and the ridiculous things adult children forgot, like birthdays, or the sound of their mothers' voices. On Sundays, she cooked for herself, not for the approval of anyone else, not to lure visitors, just for the simple, sacred joy of nourishment. The silence she once feared had turned into something soothing. It was no longer a punishment. It was a room she had finally claimed as her own. One morning at the town cafe, Norleen ran into a woman named Miriam, who ran a small print shop. "I heard from Lorraine that you write," Miriam said, tucking a pen behind her ear. "Just my thoughts, nothing formal. You ever think about writing for others? We're putting together a local paper, community voices, real stories. Not headlines, just heart." Norleen smiled politely. "I'm not sure I have much to say," but that night, she opened her journal and reread what she'd written the past few weeks. Quiet entries, raw, true, and without apology. Lines like, "They loved me when I was useful. I want to love myself when I'm simply present." Or, "You don't need permission to leave a table where no one saved you a seat." She paused at that last line. It wasn't bitter. It was true. Maybe that was enough. She submitted 3 short pieces to Miriam's paper. The next issue came out on a Friday. Her name was in it, Norleen McTavish, beneath the title, "After the Table." She thought no one would notice, but at the cafe that Sunday, a woman in her 70s tapped her on the shoulder. "I read your story," she said, voice trembling. "I cried in the back booth. I thought I was the only one." "You're not," Norleen whispered. And just like that, the healing became something bigger than herself. She didn't talk about Grant anymore. Not much. Not because she'd forgotten, but because she had outgrown the need to prove she mattered to him. The truth was, he hadn't even noticed the trust was gone yet, but she knew that day was coming. It arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in late May. She was pruning the lilac bush by the front porch when her phone buzzed. She almost didn't look, assuming it was a local friend or weather alert. But the name on the screen stopped her breath. Grant. She stared at it, watching the rings pass by. Then, after 5 tones, voicemail picked up. 30 seconds later, it buzzed again. This time, a voicemail notification. Her hands trembled, but only slightly, as she played it. "Mom, we need to talk. Something came up. I just got a call from the bank. Something about the trust fund being empty. Look, this isn't a great time. The company's under review and we're trying to secure a bridge loan. Can you call me back?" She listened twice. Not once did he ask how she was. Not once did he say he missed her. Not once did he mention Thanksgiving. She deleted the message. That night, she sat on the dock with a wool blanket and her journal in her lap. The moon hung low, a pale coin over still water. The stars blinked like old truths returning home. She didn't cry. She didn't curse. She simply wrote, He will have to live in a world where his mother once trusted him completely and no longer does. That is his inheritance. She closed the journal and held it close to her chest for a moment. Then she let it rest beside her, watching the water ripple outward. 2 weeks later, another woman from Lorraine's group approached her after their walk. "Your piece is in the paper," she said. "They're being passed around like church bulletins. Some of us think you should host a reading night. A reading night. You know, sit in a circle, share your writing. Call it something like Voices That Weren't Asked." Norleen laughed softly. "That's a bit long." "Good. That means it hasn't been said too many times." By June, the event had a name. Still Here. No mic. No stage. Just folding chairs, warm tea, and a circle of women whose names were almost forgotten, but not quite. And Norleen, who once sat at a Thanksgiving table where no one noticed her silence, now sat at the center of a room that fell quiet just to hear her speak. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need restitution. She had resurrected herself. Without noise, without shame, without asking. The event was small, as expected. A folding table with a plate of oatmeal cookies. A thermos of coffee. 15 chairs arranged in a circle inside the library's sunroom. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. But when Norleen stood up to speak, the entire room leaned in. She read a piece she had written 2 weeks earlier, titled "The Day I Stopped Pouring." It was about women who give and give and give, until they look down one day and realize their pitcher is empty, and no one noticed. When she finished, the room was silent. Then a woman in the back, maybe 60, maybe 70, took off her glasses, wiped her eyes, and whispered, "That was my whole marriage." Another nodded. "That was my daughter. Someone else." That was me. Still is. Norleen didn't respond with comfort. She didn't need to. What mattered was that they saw each other now, and maybe that was enough. She had thought the healing would come slowly, like thawing ice, but what surprised her most was how steady her peace became, unshaken by the world she had walked away from. Grant never called again after that voicemail. Norleen never returned it. But she did get a letter. It arrived in early July, folded awkwardly. No return address. Just her name. Handwritten. Rushed. Inside, "Mom, I don't understand what happened. The bank says the account is closed. We had plans. You knew that. Did I do something wrong? Please call me Grant." 10. She sat on the porch for a long time with that letter in her lap. No anger. No tears. Just a slow understanding that this was the first time in years he had asked her a real question. Did I do something wrong? She didn't answer. Because sometimes, when someone finally realizes what they've done, it's not your job to explain it to them. It's their job to sit in the quiet they once gave to you. That summer, Norleen's writing nights became regular, once a month. Same circle, same kettle of tea. She didn't call herself a teacher, just a woman making space. She wrote pieces about invisible labor, about the second grief of outliving your usefulness, about how silence isn't peace when it's forced, but it can be power when it's chosen. One evening, a retired social worker named Denise said, "You should turn these into a book." Norleen laughed. Who would read it? Denise didn't smile. She looked her square in the eye. Every woman who's ever swallowed her story, so her son could finish his. By autumn, Norleen self-published a small collection titled Still Here, Letters from a Quiet Rebirth. She sold it locally, gave away half, refused to make a website. "I don't need to go viral." She told Miriam at the print shop, "I just need one woman to feel less crazy." Around Thanksgiving, almost exactly a year after she had sat alone at that long dining table, waiting for a call that never came, Norleen got a message, not from Grant, from Harley, a short email. "Hi, Norleen. We're planning a big family dinner this year. Would love to have you join us. The kids miss you. Let us know. Harley." No apology, no explanation, just an opening. She stared at the screen for a long while. She thought of the year she had spent building a life in her own name, of the afternoons on the lake, of the folded letters she kept but never mailed. She thought of the photo albums she'd left behind, and the ones she had started again, this time filled with pictures of herself laughing by the fire, holding a mug of cider, painting birdhouses with women who remembered birthdays and names and pain. She closed the email, not with bitterness, just with truth. Thanksgiving came, and she spent it with Lorraine and the other women from the group. They made pumpkin soup and cornbread. They passed around Polaroids and memories. They didn't dress up. They didn't perform. They just belonged. After dinner, Norleen stood and gave a small toast. For the longest time, she said, I thought I had to be useful to be loved. I thought love meant giving without asking. But now I know. Real love doesn't let you disappear. No one clapped. They didn't need to. They just nodded, eyes damp and hearts full. That night, back at her cottage, Norleen lit one candle and placed the letter from Grant in the fireplace. She didn't watch it burn. She simply walked away, not as a woman scorned, but as a woman seen, and to you watching now. If you've ever given your best years, your heart, your hands, your trust, and been forgotten anyway, if you've ever sat at a table you once built with love, only to realize there's no chair left for you, then maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just Norleen's story. Maybe it's yours too. And maybe it's time, not for revenge, but for something quieter. A rebirth, a reclaiming, a return to yourself. If this revenge story touched something deep inside you, tell us in the comments. When was the moment you stopped waiting for permission to be seen? We'll be reading, quietly, but fully present.